Regional banks are being urged to make use of existing anti-money laundering and terrorist financing legislation, as we hear from Nazima Ragabir.
It has become increasingly difficult for regional banks to maintain and foster relationships with American banks following the 9/11 terrorist attack. According to Dr. Wilbert Bascom, president of Bascom Consulting Incorporated, regional banks' response to money laundering and terrorist financing would affect their relationships with American banks. Dr. Bascom, who investigates transactions to and from regional banks, was one of the many consultants who addressed the regional banking delegates at the 34th Caribbean Association of Indigenous Banks Conference, which opened at the Convention Center today. Dr. Bascom described legislation as important for regional banks in developing countries, since he said it gives the U.S. an assurance that anti-money laundering and terrorist financing are being taken seriously. He said that regional banks now have an obligation to observe legislation and to monitor transactions and individuals making those transactions.
I think one of the principal methods to be used in determining whether or not the transactions reflect money laundering is to determine where the sources of the funds for the transactions come from. In other words, you have to evidence that you investigate the sources of funds. And the sources of funds could come from corruption, it could come from money laundering. And you have to make that determination after your investigation.
Dr. Bascom said that investigations would reveal whether or not funds are being sourced through legitimate means. Guyana had established the Financial Intelligence Unit following the passage of anti-money laundering legislation, but the FIU is still not equipped to detect money laundering, as staffing continues to be a major issue.
Because it's extremely critical, because you have to settle all your transactions. You know, when you have to pay for your imports, you have to pay for your imports in US dollars. When you have to receive the proceeds of your export, you have received in US dollars. And to do so, most banks need to have a US banking relationship. And if these banks evidence that they're not looking into these critical areas of anti-money laundering, they could lose their correspondent relationship.
Patricia Hamilton, CEO of the Caribbean Association of Indigenous Banks, said that bankers now have to devise ways to set up a competitive money laundering monitoring system. This would also see banks addressing the challenges that came with the implementation of the CARICOM single market.
We have to respond and work with them. We do depend on their international correspondent banks to serve as our correspondent banks. And so our motto must be to move to quick time to compliance, really, because that's what it's about. At the end of the day, we must comply.
To comply with the agreements from this meeting, banks must have the necessary technology.
Some of our small members, that's a significant challenge. But there are workarounds, and one of the things that our speakers are assisting with is to see how to best structure to achieve the standards that you need to meet without necessarily going over on your budget and your spend.
The CAIB conference will be officially open tonight under the theme Defining the Market Space. For Brand News, Nazima Ragabir.